The moon hung low in the sky, a ghostly orb casting an eerie light over the small town of Maplewood. It was Halloween night, and the streets were alive with the laughter of children dressed as ghosts, witches, and monsters. Jack-o' lanterns flickered on porches, their carved faces grinning wickedly as shadows danced around them. But beneath the festive facade, something dark stirred in the heart of the town. In the old part of Maplewood, where the trees twisted like gnarled fingers and the houses leaned as if sharing secrets, stood the Holloway house. It had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up, and its paint peeling like old skin. The townsfolk whispered about it, sharing tales of the last family that lived there, how they vanished without a trace one cold October night, leaving behind only echoes of laughter and a lingering sense of dread. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air grew colder and a thick fog rolled in, wrapping the town in a shroud of mystery. A group of teenagers, fueled by bravado and a thirst for adventure, dared each other to explore the Holloway house. They were led by Mark, the self-proclaimed leader of their little gang. He was tall, with dark hair, a mischievous grin that could charm anyone. His friends Sarah, Jake, and Emily followed him eagerly, their hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. "Come on, it'll be fun," Mark urged, his voice echoing in the stillness. "We'll show those kids we're not scared of some old house." "Yeah, right," Sarah replied, her eyes wide. "What if it's haunted? What if the family that lived there comes back?" "Stop being such a baby," Jake teased, nudging her playfully. "It's just an old house. There's nothing to be afraid of." With a collective deep breath, they approached the Holloway house. The front door hung slightly ajar, creaking ominously as the wind whispered through the cracks. They exchanged nervous glances but pushed forward, stepping into the darkness. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and the scent of decay. Moonlight streamed through the broken windows, illuminating the remnants of a life once lived. Old furniture lay covered in sheets, and cobwebs clung to every corner like the fingers of the long-forgotten. "Let's split up," Mark suggested, his voice echoing in the emptiness. "We'll meet back here in 30 minutes. "No way," Emily protested, her voice trembling. "That's a terrible idea." "Come on, don't be a coward. We'll be fine," Mark insisted, his confidence unwavering. Reluctantly, the others agreed, and they scattered into the shadows. Mark wandered into the living room, where the walls were lined with faded photographs. They depicted a happy family, smiling faces framed in laughter. But as he studied them, he felt an unsettling chill creep down his spine. It was as if the eyes in the pictures were watching him, judging him. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself in the kitchen, where the remnants of a meal still lingered. A table was set for 4, plates chipped and stained, as if the family had just stepped away for a moment. She shivered, imagining them sitting there, their laughter echoing through the years. A sudden noise made her jump, a soft thud from the pantry. Heart racing, she crept toward it, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. Jake and Emily explored the upstairs, where the air was thick with dust and darkness. They stumbled upon a child's bedroom, the walls adorned with faded drawings of monsters and fairy tales. A small bed sat in the corner, its sheets yellowed with age. Emily picked up a tattered teddy bear, its button eyes staring blankly at her. "Do you think they left in a hurry?" Jake asked, glancing around nervously. "What happened to them?" "I don't know," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "but it feels wrong being here." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, causing them both to jump. Mark Jake called out, but there was only silence. They exchanged worried glances, the air thick with tension. Back in the living room, Mark felt a strange pull toward the fireplace. It was cold, the ashes long gone, but something glimmered in the darkness. He leaned closer, reaching out to touch it when he heard a soft whisper, barely audible like a distant echo. "Help us." Startled, he stepped back, his heart racing. "Is anyone there?" he called, but the only response was the sound of his own voice bouncing off the walls. Shaking off the chill, he turned to leave when he noticed a door at the back of the room, slightly ajar. Curiosity piqued, he pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. "Guys," he shouted, "you have to see this." Sarah emerged from the kitchen, her face pale. "What happened?" "I heard a noise." "Come on, check this out," Mark urged, excitement bubbling in his chest. Reluctantly, Sarah followed him down the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The darkness enveloped them and they could barely see where they were going. The walls were damp and rough, and a strange smell hung in the air, something rotten and decayed. As they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old, dusty shelves filled with jars of strange contents. Some looked like pickled vegetables, while others held murky liquids that swelled ominously. In the center of the room stood a table, covered in dust and scattered with old tools. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Mark replied, stepping closer to examine the jars. "But it looks like some kind of laboratory." Suddenly, Emily and Jake appeared behind them, their faces drawn with fear. "We heard you yelling." "What's going on?" Jake asked, trying to catch his breath. "Check this out," Mark said, gesturing to the jars. "It's like a mad scientist's lab." As they gathered around, a loud bang echoed from above, followed by the sound of footsteps. The floorboards creaked ominously, and the air grew thick with tension. "What was that?" Emily gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "Maybe it's just the house settling," Jake suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. But deep down, they all knew something was wrong. The house felt alive, breathing with a malevolent energy that sent shivers down their spines. They exchanged nervous glances, each one silently agreeing that it was time to leave. "Let's get out of here," Sarah urged, her voice shaking. Now, as they turned to head back up the stairs, the door they had entered through slammed shut, trapping them in the dark room. Panic surged through them as they pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Help!" Mark shouted, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Let us out." The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the darkness, accompanied by a low, menacing laugh that sent chills racing down their spines. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was distorted, like a whisper carried on the wind, yet it felt like ice creeping into their veins. They huddled together, hearts pounding, as the laughter grew closer. "Who's there?" Jake called out, his voice trembling. "Show yourself." But there was no answer, only the sound of their own breaths and the relentless laughter that seemed to surround them. Suddenly the room grew colder, the air thick with dread. Shadows began to swirl around them, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. Mark felt a presence behind him, something dark and malevolent, and he turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Help us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please." "Who are you?" Sarah cried, stepping back in fear. "What do you want?" But the woman only reached out a skeletal hand, her fingers trembling as if trying to grasp something just out of reach. "You must leave, before it's too late." Before they could respond, the shadows surged forward, engulfing the room in darkness. The air crackled with energy, and they felt a powerful force pulling them toward the figure. They stumbled back, fear gripping their hearts as the laughter intensified, echoing around them like a haunting melody. Ron Mark shouted, pushing past the others as he fought against the dark energy. They raced toward the door, pounding on it desperately, but it remained locked tight. With a surge of adrenaline, they hurled themselves against the door, and to their surprise it swung open, speeding them out into the hallway. They didn't stop to look back, sprinting up the stairs and bursting into the living room. "What was that?" Emily gasped, her face pale. "What did we just see?" "I don't know," Mark panted, his heart racing. "But we need to get out of here." They dashed for the front door, but as they reached it, they found it locked, the handle refusing to turn. Panic set in as they rattled it, desperate to escape the house that felt like it was closing in on them. "Try the windows," Jake shouted, rushing to the nearest one, but it too was sealed tight, as if the house itself was determined to keep them inside. "Help us," the voice echoed again, this time louder, more insistent. The shadows leaped from the corners of the room, swirling around them like a storm, and the air grew thick with despair. "Please," Sarah cried, her eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean to intrude." But the shadows only laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down their spines. They felt the weight of the house pressing down on them, suffocating them with its dark history. In a moment of desperation, Mark grabbed a nearby chair and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered, sending shards flying as they scrambled toward the opening. "Go, go," he shouted, pushing the others through. One by one, they climbed through the broken window, landing on the soft grass outside. They didn't stop to look back, sprinting away from the Holloway house, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they reached the safety of the street, they finally paused to catch their breath. The fog had thickened, swirling around them like a living entity, and the laughter from the house faded into the distance. "What just happened?" Jake gasped, his face pale. "That was insane." "I don't know," Mark replied, his voice shaking. "But we need to tell someone. We can't let anyone else go in there." But as they turned to leave, they noticed something strange. The Holloway house stood silent, its windows dark and lifeless, as if nothing had ever happened. It loomed over them, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky, and for a moment they wondered if it had all been a nightmare. "Let's go home," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. They nodded in agreement, their hearts still racing as they walked away from the house, the laughter echoing in their minds. As they made their way through the fog, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to follow them, creeping closer with every step. They hurried along the street, desperately trying to shake off the sense of dread that clung to them like a shroud. Finally, they reached the edge of town, where the streetlights flickered like dying stars. They paused, glancing back at Maplewood, the familiar sights now shrouded in darkness. The laughter from the Holloway house echoed in their minds, a haunting reminder of the horrors they had witnessed. "Do you think we'll ever go back?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Never," Mark replied firmly. "That place is cursed. We were lucky to get out." But as they walked away, the Holloway house stood silent, its secrets hidden within its walls, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to wander in on a Halloween night. The night wore on, and the festivities in the town continued, oblivious to the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of Maplewood. Children laughed and played, unaware of the shadows that danced in the corners of the Holloway house, waiting for the next Halloween night when they could unleash their terror once more. Days turned into weeks and the memory of that night faded, but the shadows never truly left. They lingered in the corners of the teenagers' minds, haunting their dreams, whispering their secrets in the dead of night. They tried to forget, to move on, but the house had marked them, a stain on their souls that would never wash away. One by one, they began to experience strange occurrences. Mark found himself waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the sound of laughter echoing in his ears. Sarah started seeing shadows lurking in her peripheral vision, always just out of reach. Jake heard whispers in the dark, calling his name, urging him to return to the Holloway house. And Emily, the most sensitive of them all, felt a cold presence beside her, watching, waiting. They tried to confide in each other, but the fear of what they had experienced kept them apart. Each of them suffered in silence, tormented by the memories of that night, unable to escape the grip of the Holloway house. As Halloween approached once more, the air grew thick with tension. The town buzzed with excitement, but for the four friends it was a reminder of the horrors they had faced. They avoided each other, each too afraid to confront the truth. But the night of Halloween arrived and the pull of the Holloway house became too strong to resist. Drawn by an unseen force, they found themselves standing outside the old, decaying structure once more, the moon casting a ghostly glow over the familiar scene. "What are we doing here?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Mark replied, his heart racing. "But we have to face it. We can't let it control us anymore." With a deep breath, they stepped inside, the door creaking ominously as it swung open. The air was stale, filled with the scent of dust and decay. They moved through the house, the memories flooding back, each room a reminder of the terror they had once faced. As they reached the living room, they found the photographs still hanging on the walls, the faces of the family smiling down at them. But there was something different about them now. The smile seemed wider, more sinister, as if the family had been waiting for their return. "Let's get out of here," Jake urged, but it was too late. The shadows began to swirl around them, creeping closer, whispering their secrets in the darkness. "Help us," the voice echoed, louder now, filling the room with a chilling presence. The shadows twisted and turned, forming the figure of the woman they had seen before, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "We didn't mean to," Emily cried, stepping back. "We just wanted to understand." But the woman only shook her head, her skeletal fingers reaching out toward them. "You cannot escape. You are part of this now." The shadows surged forward, engulfing them in darkness. They felt the weight of the house pressing down on them, suffocating them with despair. The laughter echoed in their minds, a haunting melody that filled them with dread. In that moment, they understood the Holloway house was not just a place, it was a living entity, feeding on fear and despair. It had claimed the family that once lived there, and now it sought to claim them as well. With a surge of adrenaline, Mark grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her toward the door. "Run," he shouted, and they dashed for the exit, the shadows clawing at their heels. They burst through the door and into the night, the laughter fading behind them. As they stumbled away from the house, they felt a weight lift from their shoulders, the darkness receding as they reached the safety of the street. But as they looked back, they saw the Holloway house standing silent, its windows dark and lifeless once more. The laughter had faded, but the shadows remained, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to wander in on Halloween night. The friends stood in the street, breathless and shaken, the weight of their experience heavy on their hearts. They had faced the darkness and survived, but they knew the truth: the Holloway house would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victims. As the years passed, they moved on with their lives, but the memories of that Halloween night lingered, haunting their dreams and whispering in the dark. The shadows never truly left them, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of Maplewood. Every Halloween, they would hear the laughter echoing in the wind, a chilling reminder of the horrors they had faced. And though they tried to forget, the Holloway house remained, a dark specter in their minds, waiting for the next Halloween night when it could unleash its terror once more. And so the cycle continued, the shadows dancing in the darkness, forever hungry for the fear and despair of those who dared to enter the Holloway house on Halloween night.